So, Senator, thanks for being here. We appreciate your time.
Thanks.
I know you've got a plane to catch. I'm going to start right in on something that may be a topic that you've spoken on before. Income inequality. What is it the government's job to deal with that?
Absolutely.
And why?
Because I think you got a moral issue and you got an economic issue. Morally, I think it is fundamentally wrong that we have a situation where half of the people in this country today, in a reasonably good economy, were working paycheck to paycheck. People who can't afford to go to the doctor, can't afford to get their car fixed, scared to death about what happens to them when they retire. While at the same time you have 3 people owning more wealth than the bottom half of America. And you have an economy designed to make the very rich richer, and working people continuing to struggle. In the last 30 years, we have seen, significantly because of government policy, by the way, the top 1% see their wealth increase by $21 trillion, while the bottom half of America have seen a decline in their wealth. In this state, states all over the country still have a minimum wage of, what is it, 7.25 here?
That's the fact.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, I know that most people make more than 7.25, but you got a lot of people working 2 or 3 jobs. People can't afford to provide adequately for their kids. People are spending far more than they should for housing. Got 500,000 people living homeless, who are homeless in America today. So yeah, I think you got a moral issue, and I think you got an economic issue in the sense that people have a right to have jobs, to pay them a living wage and live with dignity in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. That is precisely what the role of government should be.
So we have a capitalist system that's somewhat Darwinian. Would the argument be that go out and make your life better, don't rely on the government to step in and do that for you?
Well, I know there are some ideologues that believe that, but most people don't believe we should end Social Security, that we should end Medicare, that we should end Medicaid, that we should end the Veterans Administration, that we should end your local public library, that we should end the police department or the fire department. You know, most people don't believe that. What you have is what's the word? I mean, kind of a moment in American history where you have an extreme capitalism, where large corporations have reneged on any responsibility or any substantial responsibility to their employees, to their communities, to the environment, and are motivated to an unprecedented degree in modern history by greed. So you see large profitable corporations fighting hard against workers, trying to unionize, keeping wages low, focusing on short-term profits. You have industries like the pharmaceutical industry and the fossil fuel industry, which are corrupt. So it's not just greed, it is massive corruption in the pharmaceutical industry, price fixing. And in terms of the opioid epidemic, literally selling a product that they do is killing people. The fossil fuel industry receiving hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies and tax breaks while they're in the process of destroying the planet. So, you know, to answer your question, which is a good question, government has helped through disastrous trade policies, tax breaks for the rich, not raising the minimum wage, anti-union situations, has perpetuated that income and wealth inequality. I think it's time for government to address it.
Okay. Right now our national debt is, I think, in excess of $23 trillion. How important is it to lower that?
It's important. And under Trump, obviously, it has gone up very substantially. He has spent a huge amount of money on the military. He continues to give massive tax breaks and subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. We are now spending militarily more than the next 10 nations combined, and obviously he has given, his tax plan gave $8 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1% of the large profitable corporations. So he's spending a lot, and he is cutting taxes for the rich. So I think it is an issue. But to be very honest with you, you know, when we go forward, getting back to your first question, income and wealth inequality, and start addressing that by having a progressive tax system, by ending the absurdity of companies like Amazon that made $11 billion in profit last year, not paying a nickel in federal income taxes, I think we can come up with the revenue we need to provide what the American people need and also begin, perhaps, to deal with the deficit.
So what would your plan be to reduce that?
Well, I think the plan is that you don't give tax breaks to billionaires, you don't give tax breaks to major corporations, that you have a progressive income tax, that you end the incredible tax tax havens, which is not just an American issue, by the way, it's a global issue where trillions of dollars are being stashed in tax havens like Luxembourg, Cayman Islands, Bermuda. I mean, it's an absurdity. So all over the world, you're seeing governments impose austerity programs while billionaires and large corporations stash their money in tax havens. We deal with that as well. So in other words, getting back to your first question, in the process of dealing with income and wealth inequality, raising money in a progressive way, we use that money to fund the needs of the American people, which is rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, making public colleges and universities tuition-free, canceling student debt, but we also will be mindful of the large national debt that we have.
So, Senator, your Medicare for All plan, a lot of the, the core messaging you've had for a long time has been, look, we're the only modern industrialized country that chooses this method of not guaranteeing healthcare for all citizens. But a lot of the, other countries that have ostensibly socialized medicine,
It's not socialized. Some of them do, and some of them
yeah,
don't.
but it's countries that have universal systems.
Yes, right.
Like in France, for example, 95% of French citizens also have some sort of private care, and often that overlaps with what the government covers. Now, under your plan, you would pretty much not have any overlap with private and public healthcare. I'm just wondering if you could explain why that's important, that the supplemental programs remain supplemental and that the government doesn't have a private option to compete with. Is that the best way for folks to get care?
We did a town meeting. Shannon, where was the town meeting yesterday in healthcare? What town was that?
Dover.
In Dover. And it was a very moving town meeting, so I'm going to answer your question. But I'm going to say that right now, let me be as blunt as I can. We have a healthcare system which is wildly dysfunctional, wildly expensive, and wildly cruel. Okay, and it needs to fundamentally change. And we have a system, and we don't talk about it enough. We are spending twice as much per person on healthcare as do the people in any other country. Canadians are spending, I think, 11% of their GDP. We spend 18%, and our healthcare costs are going up. Now, you would think that after spending so much money, $11,000 for every person in this country, man, woman, and child, that we'd have the best healthcare system in the world. Far from it. You got 87 million uninsured, underinsured, 30,000 dying each year, 500,000 people going bankrupt. So, I believe that the function of a healthcare system is to provide quality healthcare to all people, not to make $100 billion in profit last year for the healthcare industry, not to have the pharmaceutical industry charge us the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. That is my view. And I believe the simplest way you do it is you take a program which is popular, which is far from perfect, but it's a strong program, and that is Medicare, and you expand it. And the issue here is that Medicare itself does not cover all healthcare needs, and we expanded to cover home healthcare, dental care, eyeglasses, and prescription, and hearing aids.
Yeah.
Okay? So what we do is we provide under Medicare all healthcare needs, mental health, addiction treatment. So we do away with the need for Medicare supplement. And I think that is the most cost-effective way to go. And in the process of doing that, we have a simple system. One of the nightmares of the American system is not only its cost, but it is complexity. Talk to people who go crazy trying to deal with the insurance companies. Doctors are leaving the profession because they're sick and tired of arguing with the insurance companies. So we build on the Canadian system, which is much simpler. And, if people want to get cosmetic surgery, they can have private insurance. There's a role for those services not covered comprehensively, cosmetic surgery, for example. But basically, I think Medicare for All will provide all of the basic healthcare needs that people have.
What about in a realm like mental health, for example, where I mean, a lot of top, therapists and psychiatrists will sometimes, that in our current system, not take, Medicare, Medicaid,
Well-
and sometimes not even take any private insurance at all, that it's purely out of pocket. How would, some sort of
Well, in all due
stratification like that not
respect,
happen?
in all due respect, I mean, this is what changing the system. Those quote-unquote top psychiatrists are people who cater to the rich, and they make a hell of a lot of money. And yet you have every meeting that I hold, people raise their hand and talk about the mental health crisis that exists. This
Yeah.
state is dealing with a terrible addiction crisis. You know what? Maybe we'll worry about those people and not worry about the rich and their rich doctors. And we got to change it. I'll tell you something else. We talked about income and wealth inequality. We've got to change the culture, I think, in this country. And the culture is one of greed. We need the revolution in healthcare is the simple revolution. The simple moral concept is healthcare is a human right. We guarantee it to all people. But once we do that tomorrow, not going to solve all the problems. We're going to need a lot of great doctors. We need to educate. There are parts of this country, in Mississippi, other places, where even if people have insurance, they can't find the doctors. You know that?
Yeah.
And mental health kids, we have major pediatric mental health crisis in this country. So we need to start training doctors, pay them well, but make sure that they are serving more than just the rich. And I think in terms of psychiatric care, if you're rich, you can go out and find it. But if you're working class, it is very hard. And that has got to change.
Yeah.
So would Medicaid reimbursement rate increases be part of your approach?
I'm sorry,
Would Medicaid reimbursement rates be part of?
We will certainly, look, I mean, I can't,
I asked this because we had a story yesterday about reimbursement rates in this.
Medicaid being very low.
Yeah, it's like 58% or something.
Right, no, that's
And
unacceptable.
Nobody can hire anyone around.
That's
there.
right, that's right. I mean, look, you have a healthcare system which is dysfunctional in the sense that you got Medicaid paying one thing, private insurance paying the other. And you have, hospitals taking people, forced to take people appropriately for free, shifting it onto you, massive amounts of cost shifting, massive amounts of confusion and complexity. And that's what the beauty of Medicare for All. It is a simple system which will reimburse doctors in a fair rate. But, some specialists may not be making the millions of dollars a year that they currently make.
So from a consumer standpoint, obviously the tough sell you have is lots of people like their medical insurance. They like
No,
the
they
plans that they have. Or at least if they're not completely happy with it, they're happy enough that they fear losing it.
Yeah, okay, that's a better point.
So you've got to sell people on, we're going to replace this with something better. And
Well-
you're going to be fighting the insurance companies who are going to be telling people, you're going to lose your health care. You remember Harry and Louise, right?
Yes. Well, look, and now you got to the gist of what this debate is about. It really is, it is very impossible for anyone to defend the current healthcare system. When we're spending twice as much, and we've got 87 million people uninsured and underinsured, 30,000 people die each year, and 500,000 people go bankrupt each year, how the hell can anyone defend that system? You can't. So what you got, and this is the problem, you put your finger on the issue. We got a healthcare industry that made $100 billion in profit last year. You got 6 drug companies that made $69 billion. They love the current system, because they can charge you any price they want for medicine. Insurance companies are very profitable. CEOs get huge compensation packages. This is what we're fighting. So we're going to have to take on, and it's not easy. And let's be clear, it's not Bernie Sanders who invented the idea of Medicare for all or universal health care. Teddy Roosevelt was talking about it over 100 years ago. And every time we go forward, you have the healthcare industry fighting back, lying, buying politicians. That's the reality. All right? I think it's time to take them on. Okay? So your point is, well, to answer your question, and you're right, we are outgunned. All right? So what am I doing here? Medicare for all legislation, which I introduced. We're taking on Trump, who lies about this every day. We're taking on the entire Republican Party. We're taking on the insurance companies. We're taking on the drug companies. We're taking on the whole healthcare industry. We're taking on the Democratic establishment. Other than that, it's an easy sell. All right, so that's what we're doing. But on the other hand, go to the meetings that I hold. We had them on live stream. Check it out. Was Dover?
Yep.
Good. We just did it yesterday. Watch that meeting and hear what people have to say about the current healthcare system. Bernie, how are you going to pay for Medicare for all? And then somebody gets up today, this morning. What did that person say? Paying 17, like, I can't remember. 18,000 for premiums, and they got deductibles. That's how you're paying for it now, in a totally regressive way. The median income of the average family in America is $60,000 a year. That family is paying, the worker is paying $12,000, their employer is paying $14,000. Does that resonate with what you pay? All right, outrageous sums of money. Medicare for all will save you money as an employer, you money as a worker. And I don't know what your health care plan is here. All right, that's what we're selling. Now I got to take on the whole world, and we're making real progress. We have come a long, long way, and we're going to win this fight, and we are going to transform the healthcare system.
So it's going to save me money as a consumer, but what is it going to cost me in money as a
Good,
taxpayer?
fair question. Great question, and that is the issue.
What is the public
Good, you got it.
funding of this?
Good, great question. Now, the lies that take place are, Bernie is going to raise your taxes. And in that 30-second ad, they forget to tell you that Bernie is going to do away with your premium and your premium. All right, as an employer, you have premiums here, yeah, for your workers. All right, so they pay.
You should have brought HR.
All right. Yeah, well, I mean, we just use this as, I don't know what kind of health care you provide. But the average employer, to the best of my memory, spends about $14,000, the worker spends $12,000, okay? So we have listed a number of funding options. And I haven't come up with a detailed 800-page proposal because I know it will be changed in 5 minutes as soon as it gets to Congress. But these are the basic principles of it. For you, as an employee, we will tax you. We're going to end your premiums, right? We're going to end your copayments.
Okay.
We're going to end your deductibles. We're going to end your out-of-pocket expenses, and you're not going to pay more than $200 a year for prescription drugs, okay? Now, you're not going to see that in a 30-second ad from the healthcare industry. That's what we're doing. Is it free? No, it's not free. What we're going to do for you is have you pay 4% of your income, exempting the first $29,000. So if you're the average or median worker in America, you make $60,000, we exempt the first $29,000, you're paying 4% of $31,000, which is a little over $1,200 a year for comprehensive health care. That's a hell of a lot less than you're paying today. All right? That is a good deal. And for the employer, we're going to save you very substantial sums of money as well. And the reason we do that, it's not magical, I'm creating money out of the thin air, is that in America today, you have thousands of separate health insurance programs, okay? And it costs many, many hundreds of billions of dollars to administer those separate programs. On the Medicare for All, you get your health care card, you go to any doctor you want, you go to any hospital you want, you go in there, they click the computer, and that's it. That's the last transaction. You cut administrative costs by some $500 billion, which then goes into healthcare. Do away with the profiteering of the insurance companies and the drug companies. That's how we pay for it. And then we do it through a progressive tax for the rich. They're going to be paying more, but for the average, it's not average, median worker family is, that's what it will be, 4% of 60,000 with an exemption of 29,000, which is a little bit more than $1,200 a year, which I think is a pretty good deal.
So if you want to talk about your wealth tax for a minute and get into kind of the big revenue for a lot of the programs you want to offer. So we've spoken with Senator Warren on a couple occasions about her plan, and I know that they're largely similar. You have a higher marginal rate for assets for billionaires. Is it 8%? Am I right on that? But, you know, what I'm kind of wondering is that obviously enforcement in a lot of the European models has left a number of countries to abandon a wealth tax, and the economists that have consulted you and Senator Warren have kind of made a point of saying, let's put all the assets on the table. That way, people can't. We won't have a whack-a-mole problem, if you will, of people stashing things in, let's say, antiques or paintings and things like that. But are there assets that you think are simply so difficult to evaluate and track down that realistically the wealth tax would be more focused on other things? I'm just wondering, where you're at in terms of how much manpower you need to track these things down.
It's doable, and I think it should be done. And, we're talking about relatively very, very small number of people. And I think both from a financial point of view, government policy point of view, having the resources to do what has to be done. We have enormous needs in this country. And I got to tell you, be very frank with you, I'm not staying up nights worrying about the pain of the billionaire class.
I'm not talking about, man, I'm just talking about the feasibility of the U.S. government to
I think-
actually get this stuff done. You
Yeah,
know?
I think we can get it done. I do think we can get it done. And I think we have to get it done. And I think it addresses several issues. The very first issue that you raised, the income and wealth inequality, which is a moral issue to me, and the need for enormous resources. If we're going to rebuild our infrastructure, if we're going to deal with climate change, we need money. And the best way to get the money is from people who are very, very, very rich.
But I mean, do you want to incentivize things like dividends? I mean, a lot of the debate comes down to, you know, people are sitting on these unrealized gains. Someone like, you know, a Warren Buffett may pay income taxes on, say, you know, $20-something million
Right.
of actual income every year.
He
But
will
really-
tell you his effective rate is lower than his secretary's.
Right. So, but the question is, I mean, you need like a veritable army of accountants, even for these smaller
I don't
people.
think so, because, you know,
sophistication is
it's
you know,
funny.
crazy.
It's funny. Right now, you got an army of IRS agents going after the tax credit for low-income families. They're worried that somebody may be cheating on that. And that a whole lot of families are getting the tax credit, the family tax credit, children's tax credit. You're trying to administer a program which really applies to relatively few people. So I don't think it's an army of people. It means telling those people, those large corporations, that instead of worrying about somebody who's making $20,000 a year and spending an agent worrying about him or her, we will go after the big money interests. I think it's doable.
Right.
So, some of your plans and other candidates' plans involve dealing with, aside from expanding Medicare to Medicare for all, trying to deal with Social Security, which has not been keeping up with what the growing need is going to be.
Yes.
So what are your plans as the population is aging? Those programs are going to become even more important.
Yes. Good one. That's an issue we
How are
don't.
you going to deal with that? And
Well,
pay
we
for
have
it?
introduced, you know, the founding member of what's probably defunct now was the Defending Social Security Caucus, because you had a lot of people, including Joe Biden, who talked about the need to cut Social Security, or at least not increase the benefits. And that's absurd. You got some 20% of older people today trying to get by on less than $14,000 a year. You have, in terms of the funding of Social Security, a very, very regressive approach, which says that, forgive me, I may be a couple of $1,000s off, but I think the latest number was 130,000. So if he makes, you know, $1 million a year, you make 130,000, you contribute the same amount to the Social Security Trust Fund. So what we have proposed for a number of years is a couple of things. Number one, we lift that cap, okay, and we start at 250,000, not at 130,000. So anybody making more than $250,000 will pay their Social Security taxes at the same percentage as people who are making $50,000 a year. That will bring in a very substantial sum of money. It'll bring in enough money to extend the life of Social Security for another 50 years and expand benefits. The second thing we do is that for many years, the way Social Security is indexed is really inadequate, and I've introduced legislation on it. Right now, in terms of developing, what is inflation? Well, inflation for you may be different for you. If you have serious health problems, you need more medicine. You know, if you don't, you're going to be buying the computer. The computers are going to be cheaper this year than they were last year. Your healthcare costs are going up. For seniors who are largely dependent, not largely dependent, who spend a more of their money on healthcare needs, their healthcare costs are going up. But that is not taken into account in determining their increase in Social Security benefits, their COLAs. Okay, so we have proposed a segregated index for seniors to take into account what they are spending on, which is often prescription drugs and healthcare more than the general population. Doing those two things will significantly increase benefits for seniors and extend the life of Social Security, which, as you indicated, with an aging society is what we've got to do.
Is there any kind of a means testing component?
No. Now, I believe, and I'll tell you why, and that's a fair question, and it gets back to healthcare as well, it gets back to everything else. I think one of the things that drives the American people crazy is filling out forms. We have become a very, very complicated society. And I think that Warren Buffett, who I'm sure doesn't really need his $25,000 a year in Social Security, should get it. And I think that Donald Trump should be able to send his kids tuition free to a state college in New Hampshire. But I think that Warren Buffett and Donald Trump should start paying their fair share of taxes. So I believe in the principles of universality. So that means everybody in America is eligible for Social Security, currently the case. Everybody's eligible for Medicare. Everybody's eligible for public education. And, once we start down the path that say, well, okay, you got good public schools up there, you're really rich, we're going to charge you. You end bringing people together around a program, and then over a period of years, those programs become welfare programs, which is not good. So I believe in universality. I believe everybody is entitled to programs. They are funded by a progressive tax on the wealthy.
So on infrastructure, this seems to be the kind of, always listed as the top bipartisan issue. It's imminent that we're going to have this major package in the Trump administration, and it hasn't really come yet. So let's say first 100 days of a Bernie Sanders presidency, you're looking at building consensus around not Instagram. Oh man, well that's a rough one. Anyway, mine is elsewhere. So you're looking to build a consensus around infrastructure. What are your top priorities, particularly when it comes to the fact that we're a very automobile-centric society, and we don't know how quickly we may be moving away from that, but it may be the case that, eventually owning a car is like owning a horse is now compared to, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I wouldn't quite go that far, but look, one of the things, one of the things you realize when you're a United States Senator or a candidate for president is, the interconnection of everything. So you asked me about infrastructure. The easy part is we know that we need massive repair to our roads and our bridges. Everybody, very few people doubt that.
Mm-hmm.
Increasingly, I think people, we had a meeting on this just yesterday, are worried about the quality of the water they get. What was the town where they had to shut down?
Plaza.
And where the wells were, what town? Was it
I was in Plaza.
where they have to, now they can't use 300 or 400 wells because of pollution?
PFAS, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got, and believe me, not just the New Hampshire issue, it's an issue all over the country, it's not just Flint, Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to invest in clean water. You need to invest in wastewater plants, which are very expensive. I did that when I was mayor of Burlington. It's the most expensive environmental program in the history of the state.
Cool.
You need to invest, in my view, when I look at infrastructure, you can't separate that also from climate change, which we haven't gotten to yet, which is maybe the existential threat facing the country and the world. So and I believe infrastructure is affordable housing as well. So we're going to put people to work by many millions, rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, understanding that when we talk about infrastructure, we also have to talk about climate change, which means we have to break our dependence on fossil fuel and on fossil fuel transportation, which means electric cars. It means putting a lot of money into a first-class rail system around the world. It means retrofitting our homes and our buildings so we don't waste a huge amount of energy. That's part of infrastructure, and that's terribly important and has to be done.
So you touched on this a little bit earlier. In this part of the country, as you know, being from Vermont, opioids have been a real scourge. And
How
every
many people have died, do you figure, over the years? Does anyone know?
have died.
I think it's did I read that 400 people died last year? From,
Yeah, the overall fatal overdose rate went down statewide this year, but in Cheshire County it did go up last year. So yeah, it's not like the tide is totally turning by any means.
So it continues to be an issue.
yes.
And an evolving issue. What started as prescription drugs turned to heroin, turned to fentanyls, is still newer and different drugs all the time. So every candidate says we got to put more resources into this. We got to resources meaning money. The question is, what do you do with that money? What are the priorities for that will work toward turning
Look,
this around?
this is not anybody who comes before you and says they have a magical answer. It's not telling you the truth. It's a very, very difficult issue. For a start, what we do is understand that addiction is a sickness, not a criminal offense. So we treat it as a sickness. In Vermont, I apologize, I don't know how much you guys are doing here, but Vermont is doing better than most states, not as well as we'd like in terms of treatment. So you put resources in treatment. You're addicted, all right, there's a bed available for you, there's counseling available for you, which is, we're nowhere near where we should be as a nation. I mean, some states are doing better than others. So that's number one. Number two, we got to focus on prevention, obviously. And what is the cause of addiction? Why do people turn to drugs? I remember doing a town, it was a town meeting in Burlington High School, the largest high school in the state. And it was an intro, we did it with the state's attorney. So and you know, you talk to the kids and you found out, surprisingly, I should have known this, but I didn't. I mean, the kids are dealing with a lot of stress, a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of dysfunctionality in their families. And one way out is drugs. So, I mean, I think what we have got to do is not just say, don't do drugs, but we have to create a climate where people understand that it is a very stressful world and a lot of people are struggling, and that we got to do better than just turn to getting high as a relief. And we've got to make it very clear. Somebody told me this a while ago, and I think it was true. When I was a kid, I knew, you know, in my community, heroin was not an issue, but I knew, every kid knew, that heroin killed you. All right? I'm not so sure that the young people understand the nature of addiction. That you take a few drugs and you start down a path with either kills you or ends you up in jail. I don't know that the kids know that. So we got to do a lot better job in prevention, explaining the dangers of what addiction means. God, I remember we did that meeting. We had a woman who was, God, she had a very difficult life, and she had overcome the addiction. You know, was still struggling, but she had overcome the addiction, losing her husband or boyfriend to overdose. It is not easy stuff. But to answer your question, it means putting resources into treatment. It means putting as many resources as we can to prevention, to say to kids, okay, you have problems. Let's talk about your problems. Do not rely on drugs because, you know, I'm not just being an old fuddy here. It'll kill you or end you up in jail.
How does that reconcile with wanting to make marijuana legal?
Because marijuana is not addictive, and I know there are different opinions about it. Marijuana is not part of the drug epidemic that we face. You may argue with some people, you know, I smoked marijuana twice in my life, didn't do much for me when I was a kid. But, you know, you can argue you like it, you don't like it, but the truth is that millions of people use it. I suspect the evidence is that it's a lot less lethal than tobacco, for example, cigarettes. And we're in a moment where I think states all over the country understand that it is absurd to keep arresting people for possession of marijuana. So you are seeing all over the country a movement to legalize marijuana. And I will make it legal in 50 states in the country, but I do not accept the argument that it is a pathway to heroin or other opiates. I don't think the evidence is there.
So we have a climate change question for you in a second, but first we have a climate change question for you in a second. But first,
better get it to me before the planet is destroyed here. You know?
well, however, in between there, you know, I mean, your career back to your runs for, you know, statewide, you know, national office, and as mayor of Burlington, you've always focused on, you know, income inequality, class inequities. If you can bear with me for a second and just try to put that aside when we're looking at the kind of, you know, cultural and frankly often explicitly racial debate happening in this country with what kind of messaging is coming out of the White House, with new ways to talk about, systems of oppression and marginalization and the historical legacy of things like slavery. Even if someone is as wealthy as they could possibly be, I'm wondering, how do you address things like racism, but also, let's say, would you incorporate like a third gender pronoun, they, them, for example, into, national documentation? Are there things that you think that can be done in that realm that are separate from class?
I think that I think of my many disagreements with Trump, probably there's none, well, there's climate change, but there's none that is deeper than his very intentional and unprecedented effort to divide the American people up based on the color of our skin or our sexual orientation or where we were born or our religion even. I mean, it's hard to believe that we have a president who, is attacking Muslims for their religion or transgender people for their lifestyle or what they are. And I think what you need is a president who understands that we have got to move forward and continue the very difficult path this country has gone into to create a non-discriminatory type society. That means non-discrimination based on race, based on religion, whatever it may be. And that's what I will do to undo the damage that Trump did. I think what you also have to do is to deal with systemic issues of racism in this country, which exist in so many forms. It exists in, I'll tell you a story. Again, you learn a lot. This is my Senate office. I had a bunch of young people from Howard University, African American, and we were talking about education actually and student debt. And one woman said to me, my mother doesn't like going to the doctor that she has who's white because she doesn't believe that the doctor really understands or doesn't appreciate the pain that she is feeling. Doesn't believe it really.
Underestimates it.
Underestimates it. And I never, that never occurred to me. And so you have racism, which is systemic. It's not only in healthcare. We don't have enough black teachers. In terms of gaining reasonably priced loans, we have a financial system which discriminates, which redlines. Housing, God knows we have discrimination. So we've got to tackle, in maternal deaths, my God, black women are dying 3 times the rate of white women. Wealth, black families have 1/10 the wealth of white families. These are issues that absolutely have got to be addressed, and I intend to address them. And what is so frustrating is that, given the history of America and slavery and all of the racism and all of the, religious discrimination, whether it's the Italians, the Irish, the Jews, all the stuff that we have had to go, the Asians that we have had to go through, that we have a president who is moving us in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
I mean, just another, anti-Semitic attack today.
Yeah.
So how would you go about that? I mean, there's a bully pulpit certainly to being president, but we had a black president 4 years ago, and still we ended up with this president in 2016,
I think
who's doing what he's doing.
Yeah, well, this president is doing what demagogues around the world have always done, and that is try to divide people up. Nothing new. I mean, really, in all due respect to Trump, he hasn't invented this. This is what demagogues have done for a very long time, whether it's anti-Semitism in Europe, whether it's anti-gay activity, whether it is anti-transgender people. You pick a minority that is weak politically, and you rally people against them.
Yeah.
And it's disgraceful. It really is disgusting. And I will do exactly the opposite.
And just before moving on to the climate change question, just because you went through a lot there, so are you in favor or not of codifying a gender pronoun beyond just he and she?
I have not really thought about that a whole lot, to be honest.
Do you hear a lot about it from your younger supporters? Or?
Sometimes. But.
Okay. So on climate change, I was wondering if you could, explain what implementing the Green New Deal would look like, but also in a scenario that I know, may not be of your top preference, but in the event that Mitch McConnell is still around and that we don't get rid of the filibuster, what kind of things could you do through simpler measures like budget reconciliation or executive orders that you think could put a real dent in climate change right away?
Look, the truth is, the history of, the major tax breaks for the rich have been passed with budget reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that, and I will do it. Question of climate change, question of Medicare for all, question of major policy issues which are important to working families or to our climate, to our environment, we will pass it with 50 votes plus the vice president. And there are ways, without boring you about Senate rules, there are ways to do that. Did that answer your question?
Well, I mean,
Oh, you're asking about
let me
Mitch
take the
McConnell.
border side too. Let's just say that the Green New Deal really becomes just totally gridlocked. And I know that Republicans have fudged budget reconciliation, but there must be limits out there. So even just in the White House with executive orders, what can you do right away?
Well, you ask, that's maybe the most important question, because I will be a different type of president than we've had. And one of the difficulties I think we have in the campaign, and we ask people to, we kind of take for granted a government who represents the wealthy and the powerful. That's the way it always has been. Medicare for all, too far-fetched. Public colleges and universities, tuition-free, my God, what are you thinking about? Aggressively dealing with climate change, gee whiz, you can't do that. Immigration reform, criminal justice, you can't do those things. Well, I believe, and it's a roundabout way to answer your question, I think the agenda that we have laid out, and why I think I'm the strongest candidate to defeat Donald Trump, is an agenda, actually, that speaks to the needs of the majority of the American people. I'm not going to tell you everybody in America supports the agenda, but go out there, ask people whether or not the wealthy should start paying their fair share of taxes. They will say yes. Is health care a human right? Yeah, it is. Raise the minimum wage to a living wage? Yeah, it is. Equal pay for equal work? Making it easier for workers to form unions? All of those ideas are supported by a strong majority of the American people, even gun safety legislation. So my job as president, to answer your question, is not just to sit down, I know Mitch McConnell, obviously, and it's not just to sit down in the White House with Mitch McConnell. My job is to go to Kentucky, and to go to West Virginia, and to go to Mississippi, and to go to states all over this country, and talk about the agenda that we are fighting for. And I think when Mitch McConnell finds out that the overwhelming majority of the people in his very poor state, by the way, want health care for all, want to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. That's the way change takes place.
Yeah.
So I will be, I've said before, not only the commander-in-chief of the military, I will be an organizer-in-chief in a way that has not been seen since FDR.
Yeah. And just quick follow on that on climate change. In a more optimistic sense, the Green New Deal is moving through Congress, and you still have that agency, FERC, that looks after pipelines, and I think whatever the act that was passed in the 1930s talks about, energy interests in whatever the American people need. There are kind of certain authorities that FERC gives, but it can also be a huge impediment to trying to implement environmentally friendly policies. Would you be in favor of eliminating that agency?
Look,
Just abolish it, get it out of the way for the Green New Deal?
This is what I believe. This is not just me. I failed physics when I was in college, so I'm not the scientist yet. But unlike this president, I actually believe in science and listen to the scientists. And the scientists are telling us that we have, I don't like to throw out the word too often, but an existential threat, and that the crisis is far more severe and moving at a faster speed than they had told us 5 years ago. I mean, every day. And by the way, I will tell you this, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, Brian Schatz is the senator from Hawaii, and I initiated it. And I said I was disgusted with what I was seeing on television, where they continue to talk about the two sides of the climate change debate. And we invited the presidents. We got the guy from CBS to come in, and he said, this is bullshit. There are no two sides to the issue. And I was proud to say they began to make a little bit of movement on television. And now you've seen the media. Just in the last 6 months, read the Washington Post, read the New York Times. Every single day there is another major article now about the incredible crisis that we're facing, the melting of the ice caps, the warming of the oceans, and all that stuff. Media is now beginning to talk about it in a way they never did before, which is a good thing. So to answer your question, if I believe that if we leave things alone, this planet will become 7 degrees Fahrenheit warmer by the end of the century. And if that means major cities in America and countries around the world are underwater, it means food production is cut because of drought, it means extreme weather disturbances, it means species are wiped out. Or do you think, I'd love to do all this, but I got an agency that says we can't do it? We will create a government that can act appropriately, which implements the Green New Deal, which creates up to 20 million jobs. This is, I wish we didn't have to do this, But we are facing a major, major threat. And I think we have a moral responsibility to make sure that our kids and our grandchildren and future generations have a planet that is healthy and habitable. And we got to do what we got to do.
So that's a yes for scrapping the FERC.
That's a scrapping any impediments that prevent us from moving forward to protect the well-being of our children and future generations.
So we're gonna lose you to your scheduled flight pretty soon. Before we do, I just want to touch a little bit on some foreign policy issues. So the United States has a long history of interfering in other nations' business. Under what circumstances would you as president initiate action elsewhere that's not defensive in nature?
Well, you're looking at somebody who has voted against all of Trump's budgets, military budgets, and voted against them previously as well. Thinks it's not a great idea that we're spending more than the next 10 nations combined. You're looking at somebody who, in one of his very first votes, I was elected to Congress in 1990, went to the House and I voted against the first Gulf War. That's ancient history now. Remember the first Gulf War, Saddam Hussein? And believe me, that was not a popular vote. And my wife said, okay, well, that's good. You have a 2-year career in Congress, that'll be pretty good. And it was a very unpopular vote at the time. Helped lead the war, helped lead the effort against the war in Iraq, helped do, I'm very proud of, led the effort along with a conservative Republican, Mike Lee of Utah, for the first time utilizing the War Powers Act to get, in this case, the U.S. out of the Saudi-led intervention in Yemen. And the House did it, Trump vetoed it, but it was the first time we effectively used the War Powers Act. So when I was a kid, I marched against the war in Vietnam. So you're looking at somebody who believes that war is the last resource, the last option, that we have got to use all of the diplomatic skills that we have. I know it doesn't make for a great speech. The only thing they understand is force. And people, respond, we need another war, and it works very well politically. But people who give those speeches, it's not their kids who are going off to war. I'm the former chairman of the U.S. Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. I talked to the families who went off to war, and I know what they went through. And not just in our country, but God knows what the war in Iraq did to the people in Iraq and Syria and in that region. So war is the last resource, and we've got to expand our diplomatic efforts. It is beyond belief. Nothing about Trump is beyond belief. But the fact that he is, while spending a fortune on the military, literally cutting back on our diplomatic capabilities in the State Department, etc. And I will reverse that. So to answer your question, I'm not a pacifist. I do believe that when military intervention is necessary, it should be done internationally through the UN. We got to strengthen the UN. And I believe that there are circumstances, for example, if a region is looking at genocide. All right. Should the world act? I think it should. So genocide would be certainly one point, an example of how we act. I'm not a great fan of regime change, and I will do everything I can to get us out of the endless wars that we are currently in.
So how do you get out of those?
God, I wish I knew. I mean, you don't do it the way Trump professes to do it, by sending out a tweet at 3 o'clock in the morning or getting a phone call from somebody and developing foreign policy based on a phone call. You have goals, and the goals are to bring home American troops from all over the world. You do it in alliance, working with our allies, and bring them home in a way that is safe and maintains as much stability as you can in the region. So there's no magical answer. But I think we have got to substitute diplomacy for military use in many parts of the world and do the best we can in bringing our troops
I mean, realistically, would a semi-permanent security force, even the way we have in countries, like Germany or Japan, would some small presence like that be okay with you at the end of a first?
I think you got to look at case by case.
So in Afghanistan, what about that case? Would that be an acceptable option for you long term?
My goal in Afghanistan is to bring the troops home as soon as we can. But I think the clue is to do what Trump is trying to destroy, and that is the need for international cooperation in terms of security issues.
So also in terms of military force, we have a lot of nuclear weapons. Maybe more than we need. But if you want to de-escalate that, you've got to keep an eye on what other nations that have those are doing. And at some point, you maybe put yourself at a disadvantage if they don't act in our best interest. How would you handle?
Well, I think, again, we have got to make, and again, Trump is withdrawing. I mean, it's really remarkable that his affinity is toward authoritarian regimes, and he seems to dislike democratic countries. And obviously, my view is exactly the opposite. And I think what we need now, with the crisis of climate change and nuclear proliferation, is more international cooperation, not less. So I would do exactly the opposite of what Trump is doing, strengthening the United Nations. Russia just announced that they're working on successfully a new missile delivery system, which is far faster than their previous one. That leads us to another bloody arms race. And, again, there are no magical answers here. But I think what the United States has got to do is bring countries around the world together and say, instead of spending more money on the military and the weapon systems, maybe we should address the crisis of climate change and the needs of people in our own countries and all over the world. Can I guarantee you that that's going to happen? No, but that would be the thrust of my administration. I will tell you something, and I don't know whether our luck is going to run out. I think back in 1945, there were a whole lot of people who never would have believed that we would make it to 2020 without another nuclear bomb. And we have, thank God we have. But, we've got to do everything we can to prevent nuclear war and to reinstate nuclear treaties which cut back on nuclear weapons, or eliminate them, hopefully, at some point.
Is the direct engagement with North Korea that the Trump administration has attempted, is that advisable, or would you rather go back?
I have not, I criticize Trump every day, but I didn't criticize him for that. I mean, North Korea is a real threat. This is an isolated, probably irrational leadership. I mean, a real terrible dictatorship. And they have nuclear weapons which can decimate, Japan, South Korea, Asia, and they're developing capabilities to go even further. So I don't fault Trump for trying to sit down with Kim Jong-un. What I do fault him is he was very unprepared for that. You just don't call up somebody and say, let's sit down. You need a whole lot of preparatory work with staffs to work these things out, to know what you're getting into, and he did not do that. But I think if you can avert war, certainly a nuclear war, I think a president should be prepared to meet with anybody and go anyplace.
You want to ask a twist of your last question, or?
No, I think if I've got one more thing to talk about on this topic, it would be China.
Yeah.
So you go ahead.
So, look, I mean, the influence that China has begun to exert, I think, just in the first 3 years of the Trump administration, has taken even some foreign policy experts aback. I mean, to the North Korea point, we just had, Moon Jae-in, Shinzo Abe, and President Xi meeting without us to talk about how to handle the North Korea problem, perhaps out of a distrust of our capabilities at this point. Do you think that things like the, their massive infrastructure projects, the, One Belt kind of initiative, is there realistically anything we can do at this point to push back against that influence, or is that cat already out of the bag?
Well, I think the way I see it, China is a very, very powerful nation. What concerns me is that in recent years, which is part of a global trend, they are moving in a more authoritarian, it's never been a democratic society, but they are moving in a more authoritarian regime. Imprisoning 1 million Muslims is a horrible, horrible thing. But I think at the end of the day, what we're going to have to do is work as effectively as we can with China, who is a world power. And I think that means working together economically, working together on climate change. There are cities, Beijing, people flock to the hospitals, on any given day. because of the terrible pollution that exists there. And I think what you need is leadership in this country which does things so very differently than Trump, which just says to the people of China, you know, let's work together. Don't worry about your new weapon system. Why don't you worry about the fact that thousands of your people are dying from pollution, that you want to continue the economic gains that you made. Let's work together in those directions. So, you know, again, it comes down to diplomacy and negotiations, respecting them, but also, I think, standing up to their terrible abuses of human rights, which we have
So
increasingly
does boycotting the Beijing Olympics, do you think that is perhaps the best way to send a message there?
You play it day by day. So I'm not going to give a definitive answer on that. But, you know, we want, I think one of the many sad things about Trump is that there was once a time when people all over the world, and we're fully aware that this country has never had, you know, we've had our racism and everything else, but they look to America as a symbol of democracy and human rights, for good reason. You know, my father came to this country at the age of 17 from Poland to flee anti-Semitism, to flee poverty, terrible poverty. And he, you know, never made any money, but he was so proud to be an American, you know. It was a much better place than where he came from. And I think that was what the whole world felt. And we got to get back to that. I want people to say, you know, that's America, and we want to be like America. And Trump has taken us, sadly, in very much the opposite direction. All right?
Senator, thank you so much.